Sorry, I'm going to go in two places. Hi, welcome everyone to Wilmington Memorial Library's virtual summer author series. You'll notice that we are in a webinar mode, so you will be muted, but there is a chat function on the bottom of your screen and a Q&A function where you can ask any questions that you might have for Adrienne. I will also be putting into the chat the link for Haley Booksellers. They have signed copies of Adrienne's memoir, Wild Game, available for sale there. So you can follow that, and I will put that in the chat now and at the end of the webinar as well. I am just so excited to introduce Adrienne Brodeur. She's the executive director of Aspen Words, a literary arts nonprofit and program of Aspen Institute. She's also the co-founder, along with filmmaker Francis Ford Coppola, of the National Magazine Award-winning literary magazine, Zoetrope All Story. And she's also the author of this wonderful memoir, Wild Game, My Mother, Her Lover, and Me. Wild Game's been on a number of best book lists from NPR, People, Slate, just to name a few. And we're so excited to have her here this evening. And I'll turn it over to Adrienne.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Erin, for such a nice introduction. And hello, everyone. Thank you for hosting me, Wilmington Memorial Library. And I realize that Zoom is not perfect. It's not the same as being there, but it's kind of amazing that we're all still managing to find community, especially literary community, during this pandemic. So I really appreciate you all coming. And Erin showed you the hardcover version of Wild Game, but it also just came out in paperback with a whole beachy new look. And my favorite part of this new jacket is, I don't know if you can see this, there's this eye there. Well, that is my mother, Malabar. The book is set on Cape Cod, and Malabar is kind of, she's the co-star of this memoir with me, and she is kind of watching over everything. So I really love the new jacket, which just happened. But so I'm guessing that some of you have read it, but not all of you have. So Erin asked me to give you a little background. And I would say in a nutshell, the book tells the story of my very complicated but loving relationship with my mother, Malabar. And it starts, the opening scene is sort of this very pivotal night in my life, and it describes what happened that night and then the repercussions that rippled out from that event and really lasted decades. So I thought I'd just start by reading from that scene, which is, you know, early on in the book. And I think that all you need to know to have your bearings is that the year was 1980. I was 14 years old. It was a hot July night, which is reminding me of tonight. And I am literally one house, where I am right now is one house from where the action of this book took place. So my mother's house is just one house over from here. And we were in her house. It had been this hot summer weekend. My mother and stepfather had guests for that weekend, and they'd had this boozy, sort of decadent dinner party. And I had gone up to bed by this point. And at some point, late in the night, my mother entered my room. And from that is where I'll start reading. Oh, the only other thing you need to know is that my nickname is Rennie. Wake up, Rennie. I felt a hand on my shoulder and pulled the sheet over my head. Rennie, please. Even before I turned and saw her face, I could hear a peculiar quaver in my mother's whisper and smell the remnants of the Pinot Noir. Her voice sounded hesitant and desperate. The mattress sank where she lowered herself beside me, and my body stiffened against the depression. I kept my eyes shut and steadied my exhalations. Rennie. The whisper, more urgent now, still held an unfamiliar tremor. She pulled down the sheet. Please, wake up. Just go away, I thought. Sweetheart, please, I need you. At this, I opened my eyes. Malabar was in her nightgown, her hair mussed. I sat up. Mom, what's wrong? Is everything okay? Ben Souther just kissed me. I took in this information, tried to make sense of it, couldn't. I rubbed my eyes. My mother was still there beside me. Ben kissed me, my mother repeated. A noun, a verb, an object. Such a simple sentence, really, and yet I couldn't comprehend it. Why would Ben Souther kiss my mother? It wasn't that I was naive. I knew that people kiss people they weren't supposed to. My parents had not shielded me from stories of both of their transgressions during their marriage, and in this way, I knew more about infidelity than most children. I was 4 when my parents broke up, 6 when my father remarried, 7 when that new marriage started to fall apart, and 8 when my mother was finally able to wed Charles, who'd been separated from but still married to his first wife when they met. Ben was married too, of course, to Lily. The Southers had been married for 35 years. Mom and Charles, Ben and Lily. The 4 of them had been couple friends for as long as my mother and stepfather had known each other, about a decade now. That's what really stumped me about the kiss, the friendship between Ben and Charles. The 2 men adored each other. Their affection went back some 50 years, maybe more, to a time when they were young enough to skip stones across the flat gray water of Plymouth Bay, where they pretended to be pilgrims and built forts in the dunes, fending off imaginary enemies with stick muskets. Over the years, they'd hunted and fished together, dated each other's sisters, been ushers at each other's weddings, and become godfathers to each other's sons. What do you mean Ben kissed you? Suddenly, I was fully awake. I pictured her slapping him in response. That was something my mother might do. What happened? Well, we took a walk after the dinner, just the 2 of us, and he pulled me into him like this. My mother crossed her arms around herself, simultaneously demonstrating Ben's caress and embracing its memory. Then she collapsed the rest of the way onto the bed, smiling and stretched out alongside me. Apparently, there had been no slap. I still can't believe it. Ben Souther kissed me, she said. What was it about her voice tonight? He kissed me, Rennie. There it was again. Joy. A tone I hadn't heard from her since before Charles's strokes. Joy had fallen from the night sky and landed in my mother's voice. One kiss, the gleam and shine of it, what it might portend, had changed everything. So that's the end of the reading. And of course, what I didn't know in that moment was that this would be the beginning of what would turn into just an epic love affair that would go on for years. At least it went on at least a dozen years. But what I did know, even in real time, in that moment when she woke me up and told me, and I understood what was going on, that my life had changed. It had that sort of before and after to it. And I had gone to bed as a 14-year-old, as my mother's daughter, really as a girl. And I'd woken up as her confidant and in this very grown up, seductive grown up world, adult life. And I had become Malabar's best friend. And if you're anything like the audience that I actually can see when I've been at talks, there's usually this sort of collective, not quite gasp, but, I think the thought bubble is kind of what a horrible burden to put on a child. And, yes, in hindsight, yes. And certainly having gone through what I did since then, yes. But the experience of it as a 14-year-old was quite the opposite. It was really, first of all, it wasn't, my parents had already been divorced. So this was my stepfather, not my father, that my mother was sort of running around on. And it was just, she'd been so depressed after my stepfather, who she loved very much, he'd had 4 strokes in 5 days and basically became very incapacitated. And my mother had gone through, probably 8 years of nursing him and helping him and so on. And so she had, I think she had become very depressed. And then she'd fallen in love. And like overnight, she was just this vibrant young woman in love. I mean, young, she's, in her late 40s at the time. And I think like most kids, I wanted my mother to be happy. And so it was just, it was a very, very unusual situation. Anyway, I'm trying to think of what else I can tell you about the book before the questions begin. I guess maybe I should tell you a little bit more about Malabar. And, to say that I always adored her, especially as a child, is just an understatement. She's very, very ill today and really just a shadow of her former self. But for most of her life, she really lived up to that grand name of hers, Malabar. She was glamorous and charismatic and larger than life. And, despite that opening scene in that story that about her, like most people, she had her flaws, but she also had her great strengths. And she had her shortcomings as a mother for sure, but she was also very affectionate, very warm, a lot of fun. And then on the flip side, there was this narcissistic, person who really wanted what she wanted. And at that time, I was sort of the kid for the job because by nature, I was a people pleaser and I wanted to see her happy, as I said. And then by nurture, because my parents had split up, I think, I had some abandonment issues and I was very clingy with her. So it kind of was a perfect storm in terms of the relationship. The other thing that you need to know about Malabar is that she was an absolute genius in the kitchen. So she had studied at Le Cordon Bleu in Paris, and she worked in the test kitchen of Time and Life when we lived in New York City when I was very young. And she wrote cookbooks for my entire childhood. And really, as long as I remember, we never had sort of the normal dinners. We had these very, there was no mac and cheese. We always sort of had some very gourmet recipes that were not always exactly what a 7th grader would want. And then the last thing I'll say, which is about the title, which the title of the book, Wild Game, has a double entendre, and it comes from the title of a wild game cookbook that my mother proposed as a ruse to cover for the affair and to create opportunities for these couples to spend time together, because the two couples were couple friends. And since my mother, Malabar, was the cook, and Ben, her lover, was a huge recreational hunter and fisherman. And so what they decided together was to create a book proposal. And so they would get together once a month or so, and Ben Souther and his wife Lily would come, bringing some big hunk of meat, and my mother would just absolutely transform the meal. And my role in all of it was to, from wherever I was. So like as a younger child, I might have been off playing with friends as 14 and 15. And maybe when I had a summer job in a kitchen at a restaurant at 16 or 17, whatever it was, I would come back from what I was doing at the end of these sort of lavish meals. And I would in part be a tiebreaker, tasting the things, because they drank so much. They had these cocktails that my mother called the power pack. I'm demonstrating the size of the martini glass. And they would drink a lot and eat a lot and have these great sort of riotous mock arguments over which was the better little game hen. And I would come in and I would sort of be the tiebreaker. And then my role was really to suggest that we take a walk after dinner. And of course, both my stepfather and Ben's wife were in very poor health, or were in poor health and frail. And they never wanted to, neither of them would ever come for the walk. And so the three of us would go out, and of course it looked very innocent because I was a teenage chaperone essentially. And then I would disappear and they would have some time together. So that is about all I will say. I will wait for Erin to come back and answer some questions, but hopefully that gives you a little bit of a flavor of the book.
Well, thank you, Adrienne. Yes, if anyone has some questions for Adrienne, please enter them in the chat or the Q&A. You should see them at the bottom of your screen there, and we'll keep a lookout for your questions. One question I had, Adrienne, was really kind of, when did you decide to write your story, and how long did it take you?
Yeah, I have a joking answer, which is kind of 40 years to process and, a couple of years to write. But the truth is, I think I always wanted to write and write this story. Like I knew this was the story that, it was my seminal story. It was the story that I needed as a writer to learn, to figure out how to tackle. And it wasn't always easy to figure out. And so in my 20s, I kind of noodled around writing some fiction. Later, weirdly, I tried to handle it in humor. And I think in the end, it was frankly having children of my own, which I did. I started my own family about 15 years ago, but I think I had done so much work on myself in terms of therapy and talking to people and honestly, literature and reading had a lot to do with my sort of path to healing on the whole matter. But I think when I had children, I realized I still had work to do, that I still hadn't sort of figured it all out, and that my family had a legacy of secret keeping and deception that I knew I did not want to sort of unthinkingly continue. And I think that at that time, I recognized the only real way for me to handle this material was head on in Memoir, just a very authentic and straightforward voice. And then honestly, it just took a while because I had young children and I've always had a full-time job. So I think it just, I didn't really get started on it in earnest till about 5 years ago.
We have a couple of questions about how your mother felt about the memoir.
Okay. My mother was a writer herself, and she was married to my father at one point in time, who's also a writer. So my father wrote for the New Yorker magazine, was a staff writer there. And I think she really understood my need to write it. So when I finally figured out how I was going to do it, which, as I said, was about 5 years ago, I definitely told the people, both my stepfathers had already died and one of my stepmothers had already died, but I told the people in the intimate inner orbit of the book, which would be, my mother, my ex-husband, my brother, my father, that I had plans to write it. And, I can't say my mom was, go, 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 excited, but she understood and she was supportive. She actually was a great chronicler of her own life, and she shared a lot of information. I have all of her old photo albums and scrapbooks and letters, and she was, very helpful to me. And it was so helpful because I think the most important thing, the thing I felt so strongly about, was I didn't want this to be a mommy dearest, she's bad, I'm good, all that. I wanted to really show the nuances. I very firmly believe that, despite what is obviously a colossal error in judgment, that my mother wasn't, she had her good point. She tried hard. I think she was a much better mother than her mother had been. I think, I don't know. I don't know if that's, it's, she knew I was writing it and she was okay with it. I see another question about how she's reacted to the book. And what I need to say there is, starting around 2 years ago, she really started to suffer from dementia. And so while we talk about the book, she knows who I am and she knows all her distant past. It's one of those situations that each time I come back into a room, I have to sort of remind her of whatever we were talking about before. So I don't think she really knows it now. I did read lots of it to her when I was writing it.
Thank you. We also have some questions about how your family at large reacted to the book.
Okay. So, overall, I don't know if anyone has private, terrible thoughts that they haven't told me. Overall, people have been very supportive of it. the people I was most worried about, I mean, what I'll say is in the writing, I tried to hew very closely just to the relationship with my mother, which is not to say, I mean, I knew that the other people who were in my world would be in the orbit of the book, you know, would just fall into it. But I wasn't, my focus wasn't on them. And my big goal was, you know, not to settle any scores, not to, you know, grind any axes. It was really to focus on this relationship with my mother, focus on each of our points of responsibility. And the people I was most worried about was less the inner circle, all of whom knew I was doing it, but more the sort of wider circle. So both of my stepfathers had children who are my step siblings, and some of them have children, so they are their grandchildren and so on. And that's actually one of the reasons why I changed many of the names in the book. And obviously it's not to, you know, anyone who wants to can Google and figure out who all these people are, needless to say. But, you know, I think it's easier to read something and not necessarily see your father or your grandfather's name, but to see something else. It just gives you a layering of distance.
Excellent. We have not a question, but a nice comment in the chat. You view your mom as a survivor, and I, as a reader, viewed you as the survivor, becoming and finding yourself in this incredible journey. I found the whole story a great connection to others that have complicated relationships with their mothers. Just a comment, and just wanted to say thanks for sharing your story.
Thank you. That's so nice. I mean, that has been one of the unexpected surprises of writing this book, is that, or I should say, being out in the public with it, is, you know, I had no idea how people would respond. And it felt like this kind of quirky, very unique story. And of course it is, like, it's not like everyone said, oh my gosh, the same thing happened to me. Although there have been quite a few of those, but it's more that people can either relate to, you know, a parent that had a great deal of power over them, these blurry boundaries, or this legacy, these things that, you know, just because this wasn't just my mother's issue. Her, in the generation above her, you know, her father had a whole secret family, you know, it was something that was going on. And the only other thing I'll just add to that is that, just to make sure people understand, this is not a tell-all. Like, this secret came out 30 years ago. This is, you know, this isn't everyone's shocked to know this about Malabar and Ben. No one's shocked about that. I think what is shocking was my involvement, and people didn't understand the level to which I had been sort of a co-conspirator as a young person, and I was the person who knew about the affair the whole time.
We have another question in the chat. In the book, you reveal that you had a brother who died quite young in life, and it kind of its effect on your relationship with your mother. And they were wondering, is that something you were always aware of when you were younger, or something you came to find later?
You know, I was aware of my brother's death as a child. I mean, when my parents did tell me about it, but it wasn't one of those things. I mean, I think it was handled very differently in that generation. My parents were both born in 1931, and my brother died when he was almost 3 years old. He choked to death on a piece of meat. And it was very unexpected, very traumatic. My mother was pregnant with my brother at the time, and then I came along soon after, and I was born on the same day as my brother who had died. We share a birthday. And so I'd always sort of been, you know, aware, as you are as a child, that, you know, my birthday seemed complicated. I don't know that I could have told you why I was aware. It just felt funny to me. So when I did, and there were photos of him, and there were things in my room, like this little pair of lederhosen and stuff like that. So I was aware on some level. And then when I finally heard the story of it, it all made sense. But I do think my parents didn't quite understand what an impact his life and death, you know, would have on my brother and me. I mean, I can't really speak to the effect on my brother, although I know it's had an effect on him. I mean, I really can think much more about myself in that regard, but you can't not be curious about a brother or a sibling you had that you didn't know, and that you only ever knew your parents as survivors of this incredible trauma. So that probably also gives me more compassion, or a lot of compassion, for my mother, because she went through things that I mean, she's had a hard life in ways that I just haven't.
Thank you. Well, we have a comment that this book's definitely going to be their next book club pick.
Oh, thank you.
One thing that struck me about Wild Game is, while it is memoir, it really reads like kind of a page-turning fiction. Is that something you had intended on when you were writing it?
I don't think I set out thinking how to make this like a novel, but I do feel like I really understood that I saw the book in scenes, because I think I see my life in scenes. So I always knew, for instance, that first scene was going to be my mother's kiss and her waking me up. Like, it never occurred to me that there would be another. And there were the scenes along the way that marked these big moments. So, what was the one at 14, and then there was one at 20 or 18 and 23 and 27 and so on. So I almost, from the beginning, when I finally had time to sort of conceptualize the book, you do a little bit of noodling around, and then it suddenly starts, or this is how it worked for me. It started to take greater shape in my mind. But it was really, I almost could tell you, here are the 15 chapters, here are the moments, and the writing was in threading them together and finding the themes and the connections and weaving the life around these things. Because of course with memoir, it's very crafted. And I think people think they know everything, but of course you only need to think of every memoir you've ever read to realize that, it's not autobiography. Like, Educated isn't all of Tara Westover's life. It's like the through line there is education. And the through line of my book is my relationship with my mother. So, whole swaths of people and events and friends and lovers and whoever are just edited out, because this was, if you stick to only that, it's how that moment, how that relationship shapes everything else.
Thank you. We have a question. Loved all the culinary references in your book. Do you share any of the passion your mother had for cooking?
Oh, I love to eat. Like, I do not, I admire the people who can take it or leave it. I can't even begin to understand it or relate to it. So I definitely love cooking. I love eating. I am a good cook, any of you could come over and you'd be reasonably impressed and so on, but I'm not half of Malabar. I mean, she was one of those people who, you've probably known some of them, maybe some of you are that person, but she could be at a restaurant and like dip her pinky into a sauce, taste it, be able to immediately tell you the 27 things that went into it somehow. But more than that, then she could replicate it the next night, down to whether it was a foamy sauce or a thick and gooey sauce. Like, she just knew her stuff. She understood the chemistry of food.
Thank you. One thing I wondered of, if I'm not mistaken, your daughter is a teenager now too, quite close in age to where you were at the start of this book. How has being a mother yourself to a teenage daughter changed your view of your story and your view of your relationship with your mother?
It's a great question, because it has had a profound effect. Because of course, when I think back to who I was at 14, I sort of, we all think of ourselves as very competent. If you recall, as a teenager, you knew more than anyone in the world, and I was no different. And every year older I get, I realize how much less I know. But when my book came out, my daughter had just turned 14. So she's about to turn 15 now. And I will say that she is lovely and smart and graceful and so mature. But guess what? She's a child. And actually being, like, confronted that much with that was the age. Like, this book was being published and that was my age at the time, made me really understand in a much fuller way how shocking a boundary it was to cross, because she is a girl and she, I'm so happy that she has this vibrant, teenage life. And mine really did get diverted. I mean, I was just, in that moment where you should be rebelling a bit from your mother and just, discovering your own sexuality, certainly not hers, not necessarily at 14, but, in the next years. And everything, all my energy was focused on my mom for those years.
Has your daughter read the book, or do you think that she would want to?
Well, last summer, when I had it still in galleys, this version, I came up one day and I saw her kind of like nose on the sofa, and I thought, oh, that's interesting. Like, we'll see what happens. And I should say that I have given my children the bare bones of the story. I'm not trying to hide it from them, but I also, like, my daughter in particular has a beautiful relationship with my mother, her grandmother. And obviously it's changed since my mom has become so sick, but I have no interest in changing that or affecting it negatively. But here's what happened. She put the book down and basically didn't pick it up again. And that could be for a variety of reasons, but I have chosen to think, which might be just being a, making it true for me. But I think I just feel happy that she's not obsessed with my interior life. And she's someone who reads, she reads such different books than I do. And then I did even at her age. She loves sort of world building fiction like Rick Riordan and of course Harry Potter and all that. But she's, I'm sure just a snoozy, I hope that's not what she thought, but, a memoir that's a deeply personal account of her mother's life. I'm sure she'll read it someday, but I'm in no rush.
One question I know several of my book club attendees, the Novel Ideas Book Club, were curious about is in the book, there's a necklace that's really of some importance to your mother and to you. And they were wondering where that necklace is now and if anyone's worn it since the book.
That's such an interesting question. It's also such a surprise, but like every book club, I would never have guessed that the necklace, which really, it's not a cameo, it plays a role, but it's sort of like a minor thematic role, because there were obviously many material things that my mom had really had blurry boundaries between love and money. She'd been an only child. So how I can explain the necklace quickly is that in her very fraught childhood, and I don't know how many of you are the children of divorced parents as I am, but one thing as the child of a divorced parents is, for better or for worse, you seem to want them to get back together, even though you know that that's not what you really want. So my mother, her parents got divorced when she was about 3 or 4, and then the dream happened. She saw them get back together. So she actually witnessed, when she was about 8 or 9 years old, her father, my grandfather, get down on bended knee and present her with this extravagant, crazy, beautiful, antique Indian necklace that's this like choker with, gemstones and diamonds. And it's just really a lovely, lovely piece. But what happened with it, of course, then the marriage didn't work out. My grandfather had this other family. My grandmother was devastated. But somehow in my mother's mind, the necklace kind of took on a life of its own. And she sort of attributed, I think it, was this symbol of her parents' love, but also of wealth. And she had great misconceptions about its worth. I think she really thought it was like the Hope Diamond and was very, very, very valuable. So people always want to know if I have it, which I do. They always want to know how valuable it is. And I actually haven't gotten it officially appraised, but I did send a photo of it to the antiquities person at Christie's. And he was like, it's a lovely, lovely necklace and it's worth something, but no, it's not. My mother thought it was like hundreds of thousands of dollars, or that my children will not be going to college based on my selling this necklace. And for me to answer the question of like, has it been worn? I mean, it has. You'll see when you read the book, it's a really complicated symbol in my own life because my mother had a very hard time giving it to me. She would offer and take it back and offer and so I have never worn the necklace. I don't think I ever will. I don't particularly want to like pass it along to my children. I've really tried to figure out what to do with it. I actually wrote a piece for the Boston Globe that I think came out last week or maybe the week before, but about the necklace. And I've had new thoughts that, you know, maybe someday I'll break it up because each of these gems are sort of in these individual settings and maybe make 16 rings for my friends and family and women who've helped me.
Excellent. We'll have to look out for that piece in the Globe. Another question in the chat is about the movie. I know Wild Game, the film rights have been purchased by the team behind The Edge of 17. And how has that process been as the author?
Yeah, I'll say that I did not, because I sold the book on probably 100 pages of writing and a proposal which detailed where it was going. And then there was film interest almost immediately. And I remember thinking, no, you know, I need to write this book. I need to sort of figure all this out. So I have always had anxious feelings about a film because like in my book about people I love, I know every single word that's in there and I know what I meant and all those things. And the idea, I mean, by and large, you know, you don't have much control of as the author and you know, it can be written a million different ways. In any case, so it was purchased, it was optioned by the Chernin production company, and the writer-director that was associated with it initially is the woman who wrote and directed The Edge of 17. And we had just a spectacular relationship. She calmed me down so much about it simply because she got all the things that I wanted to convey about my relationship with my mother, which is what I said before, that it wasn't black and white, that it was gray. In fact, there was this one line that I held in my head the whole time I wrote it from a Vivian Gornick book called The Situation and the Story. But the line was, in order for the drama to deepen, you must show the loneliness of the monster and the cunning of the innocent. And I remember just thinking, yes, that's what I have to do. And in any case, this writer-director really understood that. And even though I've only seen the initial script, it's in production, so that means or in development, I meant development, not production. So it means it's still being changed and worked on and all that. But, you know, it's somehow the emotional truth was held while a lot of the details changed because, you know, you have to compress time and geography in a movie. So there's no way the actress can go from 14 to 48. You know, there's just a lot of maneuvering had to happen. It all is set on Cape Cod as opposed to all the places that the book actually goes, which is Cape Cod, New York, California, Hawaii, you know, all this. So it's been an interesting process. Of course, along with COVID-19, everything in Hollywood's pretty much ground to a halt. So who knows what'll happen next. I still have hopes and we'll see, but you know, until I actually am sitting in a dark room waiting for it to waiting to hear the projector, I'm not holding my breath. It'll be a while, I think.
Sure. Mentioning Cape Cod, I really found this book to serve as kind of an ode to Cape Cod. Is that still a special place for your family? Is it still somewhere?
Yes, I mean, I love the Cape so much. I don't know how many of you spend time here, but it is, you know, in my life of divorced parents and multiple step parents, Cape Cod was the constant. So I've spent every summer here and a good chunk this year with the onset of the pandemic. Once my children didn't have school, we've been here since since April, actually. And also my parents both live here in different parts of the Cape, as does my mother-in-law. So we have the whole arm covered. But yeah, it's something about just even driving over the bridge and the Brackish-Air and, seeing the landscape change and seeing the gulls. My blood pressure drops. I love the smells. I love the food. I love fishing and clamming and all the sort of water activities. I find it, it's home for me. I've never lived here a full year. Maybe it'll happen this year. I'm worried about schools.
Excellent. We had a question in the chat. Coming from such a complicated family dynamic, how do you process talking about this very personal part of your life every day?
How do I process it? Is that the question?
That's the question, yes.
I think the fact is we all only have one childhood and one life, and it is a complicated one for sure. I think part of what it makes it easier for me to talk about is somehow I've landed in such a stable sort of, I'm still shocked about this myself, people, but I'm very happily married. I'm in a stable relationship, which I've been in for about 20 years. I have 2 healthy, wonderful children. So I feel very lucky, and I'm very intentional about my life. I've tried to do things quite differently with my own family, and so I don't know. I guess I don't feel shame about it, it doesn't feel hard to talk about to me, because I think probably because I spent such a long time trying to figure it out, and I talked in therapy, and I also as a writer, and I spent much of my professional life as an editor and in publishing, and so just a huge voracious reader, and I think that I found books to be so helpful to me personally, and in that way that they are just empathy and meaning-making machines. Like, you can't actually read a beautiful novel and not leave yourself behind and enter the lives of some characters. So, who am I? Like, I'm a middle-aged woman on Cape Cod, but I can be in, whatever, 17th century France or the Deep South or war-torn somewhere. And I just think, I don't know, I think it's so helpful. I think our stories help us share our humanity. And so I am interested in doing that. To sort of fully answer your question, though, it was hard at first. I mean, it's like one thing to write it all down. It's another thing to sort of be in an audience somewhere and have someone ask you just sort of your innermost feelings about something. But, I'd say most people who've written memoirs, I mean, there's stuff that I don't answer or don't want to go. I mean, we all have our protective soft spots, and, I will share what I feel comfortable sharing, but I don't share absolutely everything.
Thank you. One part of the book that I found really touching is how you really kind of start reading to understand yourself and your situation. So
yeah. Well, one of my stepmother, my second stepmother, had an independent bookstore in California, and she was really the person, I had read as a young person, but read the way a lot of young people read, not, I wasn't one of the people with the flashlight under the blanket. And she just started putting books in my hands from the very first day I met her. She just was like, take this, try this, just tell me what you think of that. And she really changed my life. I mean, because it, once that ignites in you, I mean, I'm sure this from everyone who populates your world, but the people, I mean, as soon as you're done, you're like, okay, what am I going to read next? I need to find the next thing that's going to be great.
Speaking of what are you going to read next, do you have any, I think of your book as just a wonderful summer read, any time of year read, but particularly in the summer. Are there any great beach summer reads you've been reading lately?
have been reading. I don't know about the rest of you. I had some trouble reading in the beginning of the pandemic. I mean, I just found like I read and I just had such a difficult time concentrating. And the book that I had started with, and I love Lily King, so I started Writers and Lovers, and I couldn't do it, and I couldn't do it. And then finally, like 6 weeks in, I picked it up again, and bam, I read that. So I love that book. I just finished Courtney Sullivan's new book, Friends and Strangers, which was also wonderful. If you haven't read The Vanishing Half, that's fantastic. I mean, none of these books are sort of light or frothy summer reading, but they're all really gripping narratively, which is what I define. I mean, my taste doesn't really drastically change in the summer, but I do feel like War and Peace, not the summer. You know, something that just sort of, you know, takes me away and holds my interest is what I want in a summer book.
Excellent. One of the questions in the chat is about your relationship with your brother. I know that in the book, you describe how kind of your being your mother's confidant kind of changes your relationship really between kind of a triangle, you know, your brother, your mother, and you, to kind of more of a secret keeping relationship. And I think people are curious about your relationship with your brother and maybe how he has viewed these events.
Right. Well, I love my brother very much. I mean, we have a tough relationship for sure. And I think, you know, again, kind of in memoir land, like I told one story about one secret. Of course, when you grow up in a family like mine, there are many and many complicating factors. So I think what's fair to say is that we weren't encouraged to kind of be close as kids. I think in some ways, you know, we competed with each other to be close to my mother or to get my father's attention or whatever it was, that we were always a little bit more in competition than we were sort of a team. And then I think that was complicated by the fact that since there were these secrets in our family, that we didn't really trust each other fully. And, you know, for better or for worse, you know, we have an okay relationship, but it's not, you know, neither of us are on speed dial for big news or something like that. We have sort of a respectful and distant, but, you know, fine relationship. And then what I would say that's really gives me a hope, or, well, first of all, that both of us somehow have really married incredibly emotionally intelligent people, and we're both in really good relationships. But our children, in this effort not to continue these patterns, our children are great friends. And I think that gives both of us a lot of happiness. Like just today, my son, while I was working, spent the day on the beach with them. And yeah, that's sort of every day. Our kids are in pods with the two families. We just live a quarter of a mile from each other when we're here in the summers.
Thank you. If anyone has any other questions, to enter in the Q&A. And Adrienne, I know that you must be quite busy as the executive director of Aspen Words and Zoetrope All Story. Is there anything kind of brewing that we should be on the lookout for?
In terms of those, well, so I can't really speak to Zoetrope All Story anymore. I get it like the rest of us as sort of a subscriber, but I still love that magazine, and I love that it's still around, and will always be sort of one of my favorite jobs ever. I love what I'm doing now, which is I'm part of this nonprofit called Aspen Words, and we have so many programs, but we do everything from, we have a writing residency, we bring writers, sort of big name writers in to have an author speaking series in the winter, and we have a big writing conference in the summer. We also give a literary prize with the goal of shining a spotlight, sort of it's a big financial prize award for fiction that shines a spotlight on a social issue. So, for instance, winners in the past have been Tayari Jones's American Marriage and Mohsen Hamid's Exit West. and Christy Leftieri's The Beekeeper of Aleppo. So just really beautiful books. And what else? I'm hopefully going to be working on a new one of my own soon. That's my big goal once I figure out if the kids are going to school.
Yes, that was another question in our chat, is if you would be working on another novel or memoir.
Yeah, I'm working. I have started, and I'm working on what it will be a novel. I'm going to take a break from the nonfiction for the moment. And I just have to acknowledge the person who asked, "How was the lobster?" Because I posted on Instagram last night. We had an annual dinner with my father, who lives in North Truro, and my son and he love getting these just gigantic lobsters, and so we had a very large lobster last night, and it was delicious, Elaine.
Excellent. Good Cape Cod meal.
You can't have them too often, but they're delicious when you have them.
All right. Well, Adrienne, I want to just thank you again for taking the time to speak with us tonight and to really recommend your novel. I know we have the hardcover here. We have the paperback for sale through Haley Booksellers.
Yes.
Excellent.
And I will just ask if any of you have read it, or when you do, since we can't go out into the world as authors and do the book touring business, if you would rate it, if you like it, only if you like it, if you would rate it or review it on Amazon or Goodreads. It really makes a difference because those crazy algorithms apparently let it be shown. So thank you if you'll do that.
Absolutely. I personally will definitely be doing that. And here, let me just enter the link to Haley Booksellers again in the chat. And we also have this on the events page if anyone is looking for the link later. All right.
Okay. Well, thank you.
Thanks so much, Adrienne.
Lovely being here. Bye, everyone.
Bye.